Well, this is super interesting. Pete Buttigieg, the Transportation Secretary, appeared on Fox News, America Report specifically. And as he always does when he goes on Fox News, he drops some major truth on the Fox host. And the subject matter of this interview is something we don't get to discuss enough, so I'm excited to dive into it. And it has to do with the transition to green energy and the criticisms from the right of the promotion of electric vehicles, for example. And as I said, Buttigieg did a nice job of bringing the facts on this. But what I found really interesting, last bit of context before playing this first clip, is that the Fox hosts keep asking these questions that are essentially bringing forward the concerns and criticisms of the Biden administration and Democrats' advocacy for a transition to renewable energy. And the way these questions are framed is as if the tone would make you think, and the fact that this is on Fox News would make you think that the hosts are doubting and are skeptical of the Biden administration's effort to invest in electric vehicles, as the example they're discussing the most in this. But really, the question they're asking, the concerns they're bringing up, only bolster the argument more that Pete Buttigieg is making, that we need to be doing more as a government to invest in this sector. Super interesting. You'll see what I mean as you watch.
Let me just pursue that if I could with you. Tesla sales fell 8.5% the first quarter of this year. Ford this week is laying off 2/3 of its workforce at the F-150 electric Lightning plant. It's also scaling back a battery production facility because of sagging sales. EV sales are nowhere near what this president wanted or expected, yet the administration continues to shove them down consumers' throats. Why?
Well, let's be clear. Consumers have wanted and purchased more EVs every single year than the year before. And, Tesla is facing more competition as GM and Ford and Stellantis and other competitive players start to make sure they get a piece of the EV market. Let's be clear that the automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and we can't pretend otherwise. Sometimes when these debates happen, I feel like it's the early...
By the way, while you're watching this, I know sometimes these subjects aren't the most sexy, not like a lot of the other stories we cover that are just so wild it's hard to not engage. I would encourage you to engage with these subjects because these are so important as well as we go through this. And then also, if you'd please subscribe to this YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Click the like button too while you're at it, the alert bell, so that you know when videos are dropped. Here's the rest.
Early 2000s, and I'm talking to some people who think that we can just have landline phones forever. The reality is that the automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and the U.S. can either fall behind China or we can claim the lead. President Biden wants to make sure that those EVs are made in America, especially, again, as more Americans choose EVs every single year than the year before. We've got to make sure that those are made on American soil in places like northern Indiana, where I grew up, places like Michigan, where I live right now. During the Trump administration, China was really able to build an advantage in the EV market, and obviously not because they're big environmentalists over in China, just because that's the economically smart play. We've been working to make sure that that advantage comes back onto American soil.
So, of course, the Fox News audience, for the most part, doesn't care about the environmental concerns and thus the environmental benefits of electric vehicles. So Pete Buttigieg is effectively and correctly framing this for them as a competitive issue with China, and it is one. And if we understand this industry is going to continue blowing up, then wouldn't we want to be on the leading front of that and not trying to catch up to other countries, notably China, and make sure that we're the ones dominating this sector? And so that's a huge element. The other one that's not discussed enough is when these renewable energy options are implemented, they're actually cheaper for consumers than the fossil fuel ones, as we've discussed in past segments and referenced the studies in past segments on that. And so that's a good way to appeal to conservatives too, who don't care too much about the environment. But then the concerns that you'll hear more in this interview, and you heard a little bit there from the Fox hosts of, for example, if everyone today had electric vehicles, our electrical grid just couldn't handle that. That's true. Very real concern. But then the way they're framing the question makes it sound like they're saying, so that means it's bad to try to address that problem. And it's bad to try to invest in advancements to our electrical grid so it does have the capacity necessary to maintain a more electric vehicle future. And it's weird because the questions are actually making the argument that Pete Buttigieg is making. Exactly. So you think that we should get more of the policies we've seen from Joe Biden so that we don't have those sorts of issues. Or another concern that you'll hear brought up in this clip is electric vehicles aren't super affordable right now. And that's also true. So then you're saying that while also opposed to the very tax incentives and breaks for people who are getting electric vehicles to make them more affordable. And if we do incentivize more and more companies to jump into the electric vehicle game and try to advance the technology, they will get cheaper. That's the idea. Thank you for making our argument, Fox.
You know, why are we pushing something that's just not ready? I mean, we have Bjorn Lomborg on the show, as you probably read his pieces in the Wall Street Journal often. He's not a climate change denier, but he is somebody who points out that this is just a market that's just not ready yet. He says we should allow innovation to push this, right? And that we should bring these cars along to the point where there's something that people want, that American consumers want to go buy. But right now, they're just not affordable. They're extremely expensive. I mean, the electricity obviously uses fossil fuels anyway to power these vehicles. So, I mean, is this just premature, this push right now?
Yeah, these are all really interesting and important questions, but I would say we know it's not premature because more Americans every single year choose electric than the year before. And if you look at the surveys, it is extremely rare for anybody who has gone electric to want to go back to the old gas car technology. Now, look, to be clear, it's not for everybody and it's not happening overnight. Our goal is by the end of this decade, we're about half and half with new car sales. But the reason we can't just sit back and let this happen on its own pace is that there is a race going on. Either China or the United States will dominate the EV future. We want to make sure it's the United States. Now,
so again, I love the framing there from Pete Buttigieg. This really could be a patriotic issue we unite around. Let's dominate this sector. Let's dominate the renewable energy future, and in this case, electric vehicle market, and have the jobs created here because of that, the technological advancements here from U.S. companies because of these sorts of incentives and investments. And by the way, I will include in the context for this that we've been subsidizing fossil fuel production for a very long time. So it's silly to act like it doesn't make sense to subsidize an industry on the part of the U.S. government. And it's just not, it just doesn't seem ready. If you're having to subsidize it, it clearly is not ready. No, you can subsidize it to make it more ready for the place that you want it to get to. And we've been subsidizing pharmaceutical drugs. We've been subsidizing farming. So we subsidize things. So that's an important bit of context. And then also, she brought up the fact that electric vehicles are using energy that through the electrical grid is still coming from fossil fuels in large part. And that's also a very true point to bring up. And by the way, these are the conversations we should be having. Instead of should we have democracy or not, and Trump wants to end it, it would be great if this could be the conversation we're having, because they're actually bringing up fair points. It's just sort of strange how they're doing it. So it's true that fossil fuels are still powering much of the grid, thus electric vehicles that are plugging into that are being powered in part by that. But just to correct the record on that, still electric vehicles are more efficient. So to get the exact same amount of distance, you're just using less energy in an electric vehicle than a car with an internal combustion engine. And so that's also a big benefit of these EVs. And it's funny because Republicans oppose electric vehicles often, even though there's just so many benefits to them, separate from them feeling like, oh, I don't care about climate change. There's a lot of benefits to you, like driving a car that's just more efficient, using less energy, less cost, etc. Now, the cost of the vehicle itself still needs to come down a lot for it to be affordable for people, and thus the very investments that the Biden administration and Democrats through legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act are making are a great step in that direction. Here's another clip.
How do you ever win the race? Because we are not upgrading the electrical infrastructure grid at the rate that we need to keep up.
Well, we literally are upgrading the electric infrastructure grid, and
Not at the
it's a
rate we
strange
need
moment
to.
for me because we're coming full circle on.
I'm sorry to pause already. Not at the rate that we need to. So then you're rooting for Biden to get more of what he's wanted? What? Great. I'm with you, John.
The debates from 2 or 3 years ago when the president was pushing his infrastructure package, and some people said, look, if it isn't roads and bridges, it isn't infrastructure. Obviously, I'm the transportation secretary. I love the fact that there are so many roads and bridges being improved with this, but it also included funding for the electric grid. Now, today's electric grid can handle today's electric vehicles, but you're right. We can't run tomorrow's vehicles or, frankly, tomorrow's economy on today's grid or yesterday's grid. That's why it's got to be upgraded. Now, at the end of the day, if we can get that right as a country, that's going to leave us better off. There are more ways to move electricity than there are to move than there are to move liquid fuel.
And a great point there from Pete Buttigieg, and nicely phrased. Today's electric grid, it is able to handle today's electric vehicles. It can't handle tomorrow's. And so, yes, we need to be investing in tomorrow's grid, tomorrow's electric vehicles, tomorrow's renewable energy at large, and making those advancements so we're ready when we get there for the future that we want to have. And who's opposing that? Republicans are. Republicans are. And so, again, I circle back to, it's very interesting that the Fox hosts' way of framing their questions makes it sound like they're opposed to what Pete Buttigieg and the Biden administration are trying to do, when in reality their questions serve as a part of the argument for what Pete Buttigieg is speaking on behalf of. And I will just say, it is true that if fossil fuels just went gone, we just stopped today, all fossil fuel production, that we wouldn't be able to handle all of our energy needs. That's why we need to continue investing in renewable energy so that that capacity is there as we slowly wane off from fossil fuels. But one of the fear-mongering devices from Republicans is, oh, Democrats and Joe Biden want to just slash, before we're ready, all fossil fuel production and destroy all of that. And so then energy prices will spike. That's just not true. I'll remind you again that U.S. oil production is currently higher than any other country in the history of the world, okay? And higher than it was under the Trump administration. So that clearly is not the approach Biden's taking. And hopefully we'll see aggressive action on bolstering the renewable energy sector so that we can have that capacity that's necessary to transition out of fossil fuels. Please make sure you are subscribed to this YouTube channel.